Namaste. Amen and blessed be. So our sermon this morning sort of kills two birds with one stone, or as I've learned to prefer, feeds two birds with one hand. Our theme for this month is creation, so we're continuing to talk about creation. It's also Columbus Day tomorrow, so that feeds into our sense of voyage and map making. But also after the service today, we're going to be working with a community partner to do phone banking for Proposition 47. We're doing that primarily in solidarity with the migrant community in our area. So if you can, please, I invite you to stick around for phone banking. It will be a really good, fun, enriching experience. So the reading this morning expresses a feeling that I know Unitarian Universalists take to heart. It matters what you believe, because some beliefs open our hearts and our minds. They foster compassion and understanding, but other beliefs encourage distrust and animosity. I imagine a lot of you landed here in this tradition for that exact reason, because you feel that the test of right theology is whether or not it leads you to acting with more love. It matters what we believe. And it also matters how we see our world. Just in the way that we have a choice of religious belief, we also have a choice about how we understand the world around us. We have a choice when we think about the planet Earth and our home. So I want to begin by reminding us of something that we probably all learned in elementary school, but it's a lesson in geography that's far more important than you probably realized in the 4th grade. We all know that the Earth is round, not circle round, but spherical round, like a ball. But the vast majority of the images of the Earth that we look at are flat. Maps of our world take a round thing and try to make it flat, which is much more complicated of an endeavor than you might initially think. I found a picture for you that suggests what it might look to unwrap this Earth into a flat image. You probably haven't seen many maps that look like that, have you? It wouldn't fold up very neatly, and it certainly wouldn't roll up in one of those little map holders in your school classroom. We're used to a map where north is on top and it's a clean rectangle, a map that's right side up. Well, here's what it might look like if we unwrapped the sphere in a different way. Remember, this is like peeling an orange. The skin has to come apart somewhere for this to lay flat. This map looks like we've been victims of a cosmic shark attack. But it's very accurate. In fact, given the options, this is the one that I think I prefer. But again, this isn't the world that most of us are familiar with. The one that we know looks like this. The map of the world that we know best is a Mercator map, or some derivation of it. To solve the challenge of peeling that global orange, Mercator used some really nifty geometry to project that ball onto a cylinder and then cut it open. On his map, the meridians, those are the imaginary lines that run north to south, end up being parallel lines. That means that the Earth's surface gets more and more stretched the further away you get from the equator. Now, he created this map in 1569, for the purpose of nautical navigation. And it was a huge breakthrough for human knowledge at the time. It allowed us to explore and to navigate, but it's also the map that we have taken on to reflect the world that we actually live in. So I have a geography quiz and a gold star for this question. So you can't read this, so I'm going to help you. Greenland is that big white area up toward the north. Is Greenland the same size as Africa? Okay, I should see more shaking heads. Okay, can we see the next picture? No. Africa is 14 times the size of Greenland. Yet this map, the next one, is probably what you're most familiar with. It's what you've seen most of your lives. You're probably wondering why this is coming from a pulpit and not a classroom. It's because it's very, very important for you to know that when you look at a map, someone has made decisions for you about how you will see the world. Someone has done a great deal of interpretation when unwrapping the surface of that ball onto a flat page. This map, the one that we're so familiar with, radically diminishes the land mass at the equator and enlarges the lands of the north and the south. In short, it makes us think we're bigger than we really are. The way we see our world impacts the way we understand it. Just in the same way there are consequences of what we believe, there are also consequences of the way we understand our world. I can't help but wonder what the consequences of having put ourselves on top of the world are. So for the rest of our time together, I'm going to leave you with just one more interpretation to look at and absorb. Because there is no up or down in space. Europeans picked north as up, but it isn't necessarily so. Through maps and through travel, we learn a sense of physical geography. And also, over time in our lives, we learn a particular interpretation of political geography. And we've all had these experiences. Some of us have gotten to travel to other countries, or we read about things or hear about them on the news. And we come to understand what national borders mean. For some, the borders keep out bad people. For others, borders are a historical residue of military intervention. Borders can mean a great many different things, and each one of us over time develops a sense of political geography, a sense of what it means that this globe is divided into countries and states and towns and neighborhoods. As I was thinking of this sermon, I realized that there were three particular experiences that have shaped my sense of geography. The first of those events happened late in high school and early in college. My senior year in high school, we hosted a foreign exchange student named Misha. He came to us from Belgrade, Yugoslavia. We knew very little about him, and we knew even less about the land that he came from, but he quickly became a part of my family. After high school, he managed to continue his student visa and attend a state university. He now is an engineer for Apple and lives in the San Francisco Bay Area with his wife and first child. But rewind with me, back to 1999, it was our second year in college for both of us. Both of us were attending schools fairly close to my parents' house, so our paths crossed often, doing laundry, visiting my folks. That year, the third year that Misha had been a part of our family, was the year that the United States led a NATO campaign bombing Yugoslavia. It was to keep Serbs under the dictatorship of Slobodan Milosevic from destroying Kosovo. and the details of that war are still fuzzy. I do know that it's one of the long-term successes of U.S. military intervention in recent history. But I also know that as Misha had dinner at our table, the United States was actively bombing his hometown, where his parents and his brother still lived. Misha is Serbian. He knew and agreed that his leader was a dictator. Yet we all watched the nightly news together of footage of massive explosions. This isn't the time to go into the details of that war, but as we shared dinner with our friend Misha and waited for updates from his parents, the world became very, very small. I learned in that time the deep difference between political leadership and the people who live in a particular land. No country is monolithic. No country is all the same. But all too often, when governments engage with each other, that's all that we see, while individual citizens are simply seen as collateral. Knowing Misha was the first time I realized how small our world is and how different a government is from the territory occupied by individual human beings. The second important lesson I got from political geography was during my time in the Peace Corps. And this is a far less dramatic story, but it was important. I was in the Peace Corps in Ivory Coast in West Africa. I lived in a little village of about 500 people on the far eastern side of the country. In fact, it was so far east that frequently people in my village would walk across the border into Ghana. This wasn't a road, just a sort of collection of footpaths that people used as they crossed one another's fields. They would go over to Ghana and buy goods that were cheaper there and bring them back to sell in our village market for a pretty small profit. Now, in theory, the people of Ivory Coast spoke French and the people of Ghana spoke English, but they were all far more likely to speak one of the local indigenous languages. So other than the financial differences, crossing this border was a complete non-event. Meanwhile, within the Ivory Coast, where I was living, to get anywhere within the country on major roads, you had to pass through police blockades, several of them. They required identification documents, and if you had anything with you that looked valuable, you needed a receipt to prove that it was yours. Anything like a mattress or a bicycle or a fan. And even if all of that correct paperwork was in your pocket, the police would often find some reason to detain a passenger or a driver of the vehicle until a bribe was paid. So it was easier to travel in and out of the country in a rural border than it was to travel from one city to another within the country. That was partially because of the corruption in the country, but it was also because the border between those countries ran through local farmers' coffee and banana fields. For people on the ground, the line on the map was meaningless. It was drawn there by European governments that had little to do with reality of daily life. Finally, the third lesson I got about political geography came from a book. Just a few years ago, the Unitarian Universalist Association selected the book called The Death of Joscelina as a common read. So all across the country, members of our congregations were reading this book and discussing it in their churches. I think some of you read it. I see Jan nodding. So the book was an exploration of the culture at the U.S.-Mexico border in Arizona. And it used interviews with migrants on both sides of the border and farmers and border patrol agents and business owners. It's a really great read to help understand the culture of that specific area. Now, And it's a pretty detailed, kind of gruesome book. After hearing some of the dangerous circumstances that migrants put themselves in, and after for a year, after hearing these circumstances, I couldn't understand why they would make this choice. But I eventually realized that crossing that border in a lot of times is not a choice at all. Because we don't choose our families or who we love. And when we're separated from them, we will risk everything to be with them. We mistakenly think that crossing the border without documentation is a choice. But I want to invite you to think with me of the issue of LGBT rights for just a moment. More than anything else, the thing that helped the straight community to understand the legitimate need for honoring same-sex relationships was the fact that attraction is not a choice. Sexual orientation is not a choice any more than eye color or left-handedness. And regardless of the risk, we human beings will do whatever we need in order to be with the people that we love. As I read the stories in that book, The Death of Joselina, the stories of families being separated and people risking their lives to get back together, something began to make a whole lot more sense. For many, many people, crossing the border is not a choice at all. Yes, it takes planning and thought to carry out, but reuniting with your family or finding work when your family faces destitute poverty is not a choice. It's being a human being. My understanding of political geography has changed and developed over the years, and I expect it will continue to change as I learn and feel more deeply. I should also mention that my bachelor's degree was in political science with a focus on international relations, and I don't have any sense that we can hold hands across the border and sing Kumbaya to make it all okay. I know that national borders exist for a reason, and I know that national security is a real and important issue. But I also know that there's no up or down in space. There's no inherent reason for north to be on top and south to be on the bottom, and I know that the little black lines on the map that divide one country from the next are drawn there by people. Not by God, or by nature, or by reason, or by right. They're drawn there by people. It's up to each one of us to question the interpretation of our world that has been handed to us. Because geography is a theological exercise. To appreciate the fullness of our world, we have to think beyond the physical and the mental boundaries that are given to us. We have to cross borders. We have to question the interpretation handed to us and follow our minds and our hearts to deeper understanding. And our compassion for human beings must supersede our concern for the lines drawn on paper. Amen.